गुड इवनिंग जेंटलमैन। रात का अंधेरा है, सूरज नज़र नहीं आ रहा, बट आई एम गोइंग टू टॉक टू यू अबाउट यूक्रेन। बिकॉज अभी यूक्रेन में बहुत चेंजेस हो गए हैं। देयर बीन ट्रेमेंडस चेंजेस इन द यूक्रेन कॉन्फ्लिक्ट, एंड आई कैन से फॉर वंस that the Russian bear is now taking out its claws for battle, and that's something which the West has to worry about. Now, the whole thing started, I think, when the Russians miscalculated in the initial thrust. What was the miscalculation? The miscalculation was they thought Ukraine will say hands up very soon, and so they used very limited force. And they gave it a name, a limited military engagement. So this was not going to help anybody, least of all to the Russians. And when the Western powers began to arm Ukraine, its resistance stiffened, and the net result was that the Russians could not move into Ukraine. I think Vladimir Putin and his generals had committed a big mistake at that time, and they should have studied the campaign in Iraq and Kosovo and seen that the Americans had bombed Iraq and Kosovo for almost 60 to 70 days continuously before launching the ground offensive. While in this case, the Russian army just moved in like you're moving in for a picnic, and obviously they got a bloody nose and they had to withdraw from Kyiv and Kharkiv, regroup and come back in the Donbass region. So all this took time. Almost 4 or 5 months passed away, and the Russians did make some gains in the Donbass region, but they are not commensurate with what we can term it as victory. It's nothing like that. The resistance of the Ukrainians has been pretty high, and that is thanks to the weaponry being supplied by Germany, France, England, and the United States. The latest thing which happened was that the British have given some missiles to Ukraine, and these can be used to attack targets 200 miles away. And the Ukrainians thought they are going to win this war, and so they have started using those missiles. They have been using drones, they have been using sea drones, and with the drones they even attacked Moscow. And that is food for thought, because they didn't cause much damage, but the psychological impact on the Russians was quite a lot. They also attacked the Crimea bridge, damaged it, and then they have now used sea drones to attack the Russian ports in the Black Sea. Actually, this was a very foolish thing done by Zelensky. In hindsight, I can say now, because at that time Zelensky should have consolidated his hold, dug in, instead of trying to carry the war into Russia. The Americans were not in favor of it, but Zelensky insisted. He thought his offensive was going to succeed. He'll be able to push the Russians back. But now, finally, the Russians have reacted. I think they have been bombarding with their missiles all the important ammunition depots and cities of western Ukraine. Now, this was the area where the Americans and the French and the British were storing their weapons, and all these have been hit. And the Russians have used the Tu-95 bomber, the massive machine which will launch missiles 2,500 kilometers away, and with precision they hit the targets. The Russians have used this massive bomber as well as the MiG-31 to launch a barrage of missiles and bombs on Ukraine, the like of which Ukraine has never seen. Now, as for my reports which I am getting from there is that this attacks by the Russians in the last 24 hours has been disastrous for Ukraine. Massive casualties of the Ukrainian army has taken place, And it really interests people to know that the British missile depot from where the missiles were being stored has been hit and destroyed. And not only that, most of the Leopard tanks given by Germany have been rendered hors de combat. That means they are no longer active. And Germany now doesn't want to give any more weapons to, at least the tanks, to Ukraine. Gentlemen, what I am trying to say is that the war is now in an interesting stage and the Russians are at last getting their act together. Vladimir Putin has increased the draft for military service up to the age of 30, so he's got more manpower available. And he's also carrying out recruitment in Kazakhstan, where they're giving a bonus of $5,200, a joining bonus to anybody joining the Russian army. And so manpower is not a shortage, while Russia has got tremendously advanced technology and they're using those latest weapons in Ukraine. I think Zelensky must be now wondering why he caught the Russian bear by the tail. It's a very dangerous thing to do. And now, gentlemen, the Zelensky is the man who is now facing a question mark, because the war is now not going his way, number one, and though the French, the Germans and the British have said that we'll keep on supplying weapons to Ukraine, fine, you can do it, but you must remember that you are antagonizing a superpower, militarily one of the strongest in the world at the moment. In fact, I think in their own area, that is their local area, they are the strongest military power, and Americans have not much of a force there to face the Russians. Russians have scrapped the grain deal and now they have hit the depots, including the port on the Danube River, which was ferrying wheat. And as you know, wheat is a staple diet of Europe and the world, and the net result is disaster. The world prices of wheat have gone up. Ukraine as it is destroyed. I don't think going to rise up for the next 50 years, even if the Americans pour in $1 trillion, which they probably want to do it. But then, gentlemen, one must be a realistic man in life. And I don't think Joe Biden is realistic. He doesn't know what's happening. He's senile, and I think he doesn't know what to do in Ukraine now. Britain and France, as I told you in my earlier video, are no longer the global power. They are riding piggy bank on the Americans. And they fail to realize that the war in Ukraine is lost. This is my view, and I am correct. Because the Russians have now unleashed a tremendous barrage, which in the last 24 hours has destroyed much of Ukraine's infrastructure. But things are not finishing there. The Russian ally, that is Belarus, is now in the act. And the Wagner group, which had gone to Belarus, is threatening Poland. And Poland and Czechoslovakia are the two countries which are supplying the maximum weapons to Ukraine. It's very sad that they're doing it, because they don't realize that both these countries could be just wiped out on the world map. I have repeatedly mentioned to you, and even the American Chief of General Staff had mentioned, that if you antagonize the Russians up to a level, they could use or engineer a nuclear explosion in Ukraine. And that's going to be a disaster not only for Ukraine, but also for Poland and all these small countries which are trying to support Ukraine in the war against Russia. Gentlemen, the situation is very grim, let me tell you, very, very grim at the moment. And at last, in my opinion, the pendulum is swinging in favor of the Russians, and the Russians now know that we are not going to be defeated. They have unleashed their latest weaponry on Ukraine, and even NATO is worried. Now, what happens tomorrow if there is a clash between Belarus and Poland, which is on the cards? And of course, this is as per the plan of the Russians. And Russia has already said that if anybody attacks Belarus, it will be considered an attack on Russia. The same thing the Atlantic Charter says. I think it's Section 5 of the Act which says that an attack on any North Atlantic Treaty country would be treated as an attack on all NATO. It's easy to talk, as I said, but when you come down to brass tacks, it's not easy to implement. I do not think NATO has that cohesive force, the power to intervene in Ukraine, or even if there's a war in Poland. It will be a local war, probably carried on between the Wagner group and Poland. And I don't think the Poles are great fighters. They haven't achieved anything. If you remember, I don't see any time in history Poland had a big empire or something like that. They were just either occupied by Germany or by Russia, and for long periods they were the member of the Tsarist Empire. So Poland, I think, is a country which is living in a dream world, and the leadership, I would say, should be wary of what's happening. And they suffered tremendous destruction during World War II, when Warsaw was almost reduced to ruble. And I'm afraid the leadership must realize that such a situation does not happen again. That's the point which I must make. Gentlemen, Poland is under great threat, and Belarusia towing the Russian line can instigate any problem. The Russians have already upped the ante, and Ukraine doesn't know what to do. In such a situation, it's very interesting to see what's going to happen tomorrow. Let's see what happens. What the Americans, the British and the French can do. They have got so many problems of their own, which I will discuss later. The first is the demographic population. They don't have the young men available for battle. None of the Novio people, the new ones who are coming up in these countries, want to join the military. And the bigger problem is the birth rate of the European woman, which is less than 2.1, is just hovering around 1 to 1.2, and that means there is a declining population. No manpower available. They have got a lot of fifth columnists inside, the Muslims, who don't integrate with the European ethos, and they are the ones who are going to create a problem for Europe. So it's not going to be all honky-dory and Section 4 or whatever you keep talking of. The NATO treaty is going to lead them nowhere. And at the same time, I think Ukraine will have to ultimately say, yes sir, 3 bags full, or risk complete annihilation. I close now, gentlemen. Wish you all the best. Jai Hind. Glory to India. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel, share it with your friends, and come back for more. Bye-bye and God bless.